few years ago, I was at an exhibition opening in Harare. On one side of the room, there were paintings on the wall, framed, labeled, and prized. On the other side, near the entrance, someone had placed a large hand-woven basket. Beautiful thing. The kind of weaving that takes weeks, the kind of pattern that carries generations of knowledge in every strand. Nobody stopped at the basket. People walked past it on the way to the paintings. One person actually set their wine glass on that basket. That moment has stayed with me because that basket was, by any serious measure, as considered and as skilled and as culturally dense as anything hanging on those walls. The only difference was which side of a line it had been placed on. Today, I want to talk about that line, where it came from, who drew it, and whether it still deserves to exist. My name is Marilyn. I am a curator, researcher, and art advisor based in Zimbabwe. I have been in love with art for as long as I can remember, and I have spent years working with art, thinking about it, writing about it, advising buyers, advising collectors, and sitting with it in galleries and in homes. And the one thing that I keep coming back to is this: art should not feel like it belongs to someone else. Welcome to A Twist of Thought, where we have conversations about art, what it means, who it is for, where it comes from, and why it matters to all of us. The distinction between art and craft is not ancient. It was actually constructed deliberately and with specific interests in mind, mostly during the European Renaissance. Before the 15th century, painters and sculptors in Europe were tradespeople. They belonged to guilds alongside carpenters and stonemasons. The idea that a painter was engaged in something categorically different from a weaver or a potter did not exist in the way that we understand it today. What changed was the rise of the art academies, or academies rather, institutions that elevated certain practices, gave them theory and philosophy and Latin vocabulary, and placed them inside a separate category called fine art. Painting, sculpture, architecture. The rest, weaving, ceramics, embroidery, metalwork, was reclassified as applied art, decorative art, or simply craft. Once that classification was in place, it could be exported, and it was, through colonial education systems, through missionary schools, through the entire apparatus of cultural hierarchy that Europe sent around the world. This distinction arrived in Africa and in Asia and in the Americas, places where it had never existed before, places where the very idea of separating the beautiful from the useful would have seemed strange and impoverished. In Shona tradition, in Ndebele tradition, in Lozi tradition, across so much of the continent, objects were made to be both things at once. A headdress is carved with the care and skill of what the West would call sculpture. A Ndebele wall is painted with a geometric precision and symbolic depth that rivals any gallery canvas. The separation was never part of the original logic. Here's something worth sitting with. In most cultures, the practices that got reclassified as craft, such as weaving and pottery and beadwork, textile and basketry, were predominantly made by women. Painting and sculpture, the practices that kept the fine art designation, were predominantly male domains in the European tradition. That is not coincidence. The devaluation of craft maps almost perfectly onto the devaluation of women's labor. What women made in the home, in the community, in service of daily life, that was not taken seriously as intellectual or creative production. It was taken for granted. The feminist art historian Roseka Parker documented this in a book called The Subversive Stitch, tracing how embroidery, once practiced and valued by both men and women in medieval Europe, was progressively feminized, and in the process, it was stripped of its cultural status. The needle became a symbol of domesticity rather than artistry. In Zimbabwe, in many parts of Africa, women have been the primary makers of some of the most visually and technically extraordinary objects in our cultural history. Their names are often not recorded. The work is often in storage and not on display. Their mastery is called tradition rather than genius. That is a story about gender as much as it is a story about art. There is a well-known phenomena in the art world. An object that is considered craft in one context becomes art the moment it enters a gallery. Grayson Perry is a British ceramic artist who has won the Turner Prize, one of the most prestigious contemporary art awards in the world. He makes pots, decorative, narrative, complex, extraordinary pots. Because he's a named artist, because his pots sit in a gallery and in museums, they are art. A woman in a village in Venda making pots with equal or greater skill is, in the same system, a craftsperson. The object has not changed, the context has. This tells us something very important. The art/craft distinction is not really about the object at all. It is about the systems of legitimacy that surround it. It is about who gets to name things and from what position of authority. African objects in Western museums are a particularly sharp example of this dynamic. A Kuba textile, a Benin bronze, a Chokwe mask. When these objects sit in the British Museum, they are presented as art, as cultural heritage, as objects of study and significance. Many of them arrived there through colonial acquisition. They were taken, they were stolen, they were purchased for almost nothing, or they were gifted under duress. The Western Museum conferred significance on objects that it had stripped from their original context. And the people who made these objects had no say in that classification. So, rather, does the distinction still serve us? Honestly, I think it has outlived whatever usefulness it ever had. And I think the more interesting question is what we lose by maintaining it. We lose the full history of human creativity, which has never respected this boundary. We lose the work of women who have been the makers of some of the most technically and symbolically rich objects in human history. We lose the capacity to value African creative traditions fully, which were never organized around this particular hierarchy. The basket at that opening in Harare deserved to be looked at. Whoever made it deserved to have their name on a label. And the person who set a wine glass on it, well, they were operating from a system of value that had absorbed without questioning. That is what I want to question and change, one conversation at a time.